Hello guys, welcome back to the channel. We have some buffs and nerf announcements to talk about. Now we've been teased with what is going to be buffed and what is going to be nerfed, but we've not been given the exact details of each individual change, and we're just going to speculate that in this video. Now before we begin, we have some extra information from Nicholas Deck Tech Weiss. The Death Knight symbol is because there's a general rules system change coming for the Death Knight. That will generally make it weaker and curb some negative play experiences. Details on Thursday. So what can this mean? Well, this is related to this little symbol on the right, on the nerfs, the general Death Knight. And to me, it's really got to be to do with the Discover. It's the only real option, I think. I mean, a general rule change is either Discover, or at a push, maybe something to do with corpse generation, but I think it's most likely going to be Discover rules. And there's really two options that stand out. One of them is making it so Death Knights can only discover from the blood rooms that they're teched for before the match. So if you're a triple blood deck, you can only discover from blood. If you're two frost one blood, you can only discover those sort of runes in the game, that sort of thing. I don't think this is going to be the case because that's actually more of a buff. Because if you're playing a blood DK, you actually want to just discover removal more often. If you're playing a frost DK, you want to discover more frost for burn more often than finding the other ones. So while it can be frustrating sometimes for a blood DK to Frostworm's Fury you, I think this is not going to be the case for the change. Instead, it's more likely going to be limiting the triple rune cards from the Discover pool so that you cannot discover them. Take a look in Hearthstone. This means you're not going to be able to be discovering some of the crazy ones like the Frostworm's Fury, extra Morgrains, Lord Marrogar, not going to be in there. Soul Stealer, not extra copies of that, and like a big one which frustrates a lot of people is not going to be able to discover extra copies of Vampiric Blood. So with this change, it's going to be quite nice to know that they're capped at plus 20. Throughout a game, instead of getting those ridiculous games where they've like plus 40 health or something. And I think it's going to be a generally decent change if this is the one that happens. I think it will be. It's going to be mostly for feels though. The overall power level of DK is still going to be pretty good. Like a lot of the power cards are not triple, they're double, like the Fridge. Some of the blood rune cards like Corpse Explosion and Blood Boil are also double red. So while you will be facing a lot less Vampiric Bloods, you're actually going to be facing slightly more Blood Boils and Corpse Explosions against a Blood DK just because they've taken out some of the other cards from the Discover pool. Alright, moving on, we have some other nerfs. We're getting Rowdy Fang being nerfed, as we can see here. Now this nerf is more likely to be a minor change. This card's been pretty good in a lot of decks. It's very, very aggressive. And there's maybe a little bit too much damage on the card. So most likely, I think we're just going to see the damage go down a bit. Probably to 3. 2 seems a bit too weak. I think you could also maybe change the stat line to a 1-4 and keep it as +4 attack, so it's a bit easier to remove, or maybe even a 1-3 is possible. So like, it's just a bit more easy to kill the Rowdy Fan instead of the other minion that gets buffed, because oftentimes the other minion getting buffs like an egg. So if you kill an egg, it's like not really progressing you much because something else is going to pop out anyway. So yeah, either like a 1-4 or at a push a 1-3, or it's going to be +3 attack, I think, most likely for this card. It's going to have some other effects like making Lady Steno a little bit weaker, because you can't combo with her. But I think that combo isn't really necessary to make Senno a powerhouse, and she absolutely is. And it's going to be untouched going into the new patch, so expect her to still be very, very strong, even with a change to this card. Next we got Frigidara being nerfed. This is a very powerful card in Frost Decay. AoE's the board. Often you're against Frost Decay and you're trying to push for a little window before you get Frostwyrm's Fury, and then they just have the fridge and your board explodes along with your face soon after. So this card getting a nerf, it's a bit of a power outlier. It's actually got a really high mulligan win rate for a 6-drop in the deck. So what kind of changes are going to happen to this? I don't think they're going to change the draw 2 or the deal 2, most likely. The ones I think are more likely to change for this is the mana cost going up to 7. And that makes things a bit weird because 7's when you want to do the Frostwyrm Furies, so if you have to play this first, like, it's a bit harder. I think that's quite a harsh nerf to the card. Or more likely they're just going to get the stats decreased to maybe like a 4-5 or a 4-4 even, I could see. Just make it a bit more manageable as a card, so that if they do the tempo swing, at least you can more easily swing them back. I think I would have liked to see a change to Frostwyrm's Fury, because I think it's the more frustrating card in Frost Decay, and maybe make this either 8 mana or deal 4, summon a 4-4. One of those two changes I think I would have preferred to changing Fridge. But we'll see whether what change this is going to be to begin with and how impactful it will be, because I think if it's just the stat change, a lot of the time that doesn't matter that much, because the power of this is just the AoE and the fact that it's going to draw you your Frostwyrm's Fury. And unless they heavily nerf the stats, I don't see the deck getting that much weaker. We're getting Twig changed in Wild. I'm not going to speculate too much on that one because I'm not a Wild player, but hopefully they just gut the card. Because I know some of you Wild bros are having a real rough time out there. Alright, now moving on to the buffs, we've got some warrior buffs. The first one is going to be Warmaster Boon. Or Rockmaster Boon, sorry, the previous one was Warmaster. Battlecry, copy a minion of each minion type in your deck, in your hand. 4 mana, 4/3. This is probably going to be decreased in mana, or made a 4/5. Those are the two options. I think out of the two of those, making the mana cheaper is going to make the card a bit more viable. Being able to copy on-curve plays like Sword Eater or Thoribalor potentially is quite nice, along with all the other menagerie stuff. But this being 4 mana, it's just like a bit too late for this kind of effect. You kind of already want to be playing your menagerie cards instead of playing this greedy value option. So even with a increased stat line to like a 4/5, I don't think this would be like particularly crazy good. If it's 3 mana, it's just going to smooth out a lot of turns. And I think it might be okay. Probably playable in the menagerie deck at 3, but I don't think it's going to be busted. Also getting changes to 2 of the Rift cards here. First one being, where is it? Just type in Riff. First one being the Verse Riff. This is probably just going to 1 mana. Let's be fair. There's no other change to this card other than making it 1 mana. That's like a slam dunk. The Chorus Riff is not getting a change, but the Bridge Riff is getting a change. Summon a 3/4 rocker with Taunt and a 4/3 with Rush. Finale, play your last Riff. So the Riffs right now are really terrible. Part of it's because of the Verse Riff being so bad. If this is 1, it's a bit easier to repeat some of the other ones. This one's like not bad, but it's a little overcosted for what you get. So only really 2 options here. Decrease the cost to 5 or increase the stats. Now you could increase the stats to like a 3/5 and a 4/4 potentially. Maybe a bit easier to get some value trades, a bit easier to stabilize your board with just to increase its stats. Could see that happening actually. Pretty reasonable, and also making it 5 mana, also very reasonable. With the Verse Riff going to 1, you actually want to probably use this mainly to just repeat some of these other riffs. If that's what's going to happen. I mean, it's pretty much going to happen. Be 1 mana. These are kind of getting like the relic treatment that Demon Hunter got, where the relic package was just overcosted coming in. And it's a very similar synergistic package, and on launch was way too expensive, but now they're making things cheaper, I assume. So we'll see if it's strong after that. Could be. I mean, if both of these get reduced, let's say this is 5 mana, play Bridge Rift and Verse Rift on the same turn, you get quite a lot of stats out of that. Might be okay. And the Verse Rift, if this is 1 mana, it's going to be a bit easier to just weave into as a removal. I mean, it becomes a Claw. Claw's not fantastic, but if you're boosting the rest of your deck, maybe it's a bit more playable. Also getting a change to Power Slider. Rush Battle Crow, gain +1/+1 for each minion type you've played this game. 3 mana, 1/2. I think this might just be getting put in line with Rogue's Rhyme Spinner. Maybe make them both 1/3s. Not sure why this is a 1/2 to begin with, but yeah. The Menagerie Warrior deck's a little underpowered. They're getting a little boost from some of these changes. I don't know if this getting an extra health is actually going to be super impactful, to be honest. Like, the card's just fine. I heard somebody suggest gain +2/+2 for each minion type, but I think that might scale a bit too quickly. The thing already gets kind of big, but +2/+2 seems a bit crazy. So I think more likely it's going to get a stat change. 1/3 seems like the most likely target. Also, we've got Fright and Flunky getting a change. Sorry about that. So this came back into standard in the core set, and at the time I was like, why is this a 2/2? Right? Everyone else was getting buffs to some of the cards coming in, and this one still remained as a 2/2. I think back then I was like, we make it a 3 health would be reasonable. But I think a cooler change to this card, now that they have the chance to change it again, is to maybe make it a 1 mana 1/2. And it'd be a really, really strong 1-drop for Warrior if they did that. 1 mana 1/2 with Taunt to discover a Taunt minion. High value, high impact, and Warrior does need some help, so if there's one way to do it, it's like giving them an OP 1-drop. Not sure it would be like too OP, but it would be certainly very, very good. Making this a 2 mana 2/3 is really the other option, I think. I don't think they're going to make it a 3/2, because it's Taunt, it's like more defensively oriented, this card. But I mean, they could do, I suppose. If it's a 2 mana 2/3, it could see some play. I mean, it's like not a bad minion by any means. Some value, decent stat line on a 2-drop. It's pretty decent, but I'm kind of hoping they go for the 1 mana option, because that'll just give Warrior such a big boost. And they definitely need it. Also getting shield block changed. So this one's getting buffed. There's 2 options I see. I mean, there's some people are suggesting you can make it draw 2 cards. I think they're not going to do that. Most likely, I think it's just going to be staying as draw a card, and maybe increase the armor to 6 or 7, probably 7. They're doing that, or the more likely one maybe is to decrease the cost to 2 to be more in line with what Blood DK has in Vampiric Blood. 2 mana shield block, gain 5. Vampiric Blood, same effect, but it's gain 10. There are some armor synergies in Warrior, and you don't have to spend corpses to do it as well. So even having said that, they're kind of on par with each other, and it will help Warrior out a bit. One thing I do think is that Control Warrior probably is not going to be that good anyway, because they just don't have good removal tools available to them. And a change I really wanted to see, which is not happening, is Last Stand. I really wanted this card to go down to Mana First 6. Right now, it's just a bit too clunky to play this for Mana First 7. If you're on the coin and your big taunt minion is like this, you have to wait till actually turn 7 to play it. You can't go like coin, draw it, and play this on the same turn. Also, running things like Nelly, Remornia become really clunky if your power plays 1+6 on turn 7. Suddenly these other 7 mana cards are just getting in the way of this one. So I would have liked to see this kind of small change to it, but I think it would have unlocked quite a bit of viability for this card for Warrior. But that's not going to be the case. We're getting Flowrider changed as well. Now, I had a look on HS Replay for this card, and it's actually one of the better win rate cards within Enraged Warrior. Take a look real quick on HS Replay. So this is an Enraged Warrior deck. And Thoriblaw is just the highest Mondogan win rate, and second highest drawn win rate card in the most popular Enraged Warrior deck that we have. So they're buffing like one of the best cards. It's not something we haven't seen before. Like going back to Thunderhead days, they buffed one of Shaman's best card, and it made the deck very viable. So maybe buffing this also, even though it's the best card, will be a good direction. So what can they do? I think attack going up to 5 is very likely, just to make the card trade a little bit better, kill things like Thing from Below, value trade into 5 health minions as well, like Rowdy Fang, although that's getting a nerf, things like that. Other suggestions I've heard are remove the revive limit or revive more times. I don't know how strong that's gonna be for this kind of deck, because currently they don't run a lot of fire spells. This one's running Light of Phoenix, Black Rock and Roll, and I think like one other fire spell, Embers of Strength, that's the one. So it's not really like the revival limit's really costing you so much with Thoriblaw, I think. Usually you're not going to revive it more than 2 times within a game anyway. Plus, there's no real way to tutor this that easily if you're playing a deck with a lot of minions for Warrior. The only way to tutor it, I think, is Chorus Riff, but this kind of requires you not to play many minions in your deck. But who knows, if it does get infinite revives, maybe you can make a deck where you're really just trying to abuse Thoriblaw as much as possible, and that sounds kind of fun. But I think I'm not really sure on this one. I think 5 attack is very reasonable as well. They've done it before in the past with things like Remornia, just boosting that attack up on the card, and I think it's very reasonable in this case as well. Like, the card doesn't need that much of a boost. Okay, moving on. We have Lash Siren in Mage getting most likely reverted. Now, I don't love this change, because this is just an old deck. Now, it was a deck that people maybe didn't get to play with long enough before it got nerfed to have their fun with it. A lot of people did enjoy playing it, yeah, but a lot of people just hated playing against it as well, and that was partly why it got nerfed. It didn't really feel fun to just have your opponent put out a lot of ridiculous stuff on one turn just because they drew this card, and the turns just took a long time to watch as well. But, I mean, I personally really love playing with this card at 4 mana. So I'm going to be kind of happy to do it again. The only thing I'm a bit sad about is the fact that it's a year-old card. It's not a new card at all. And there's plenty of new cards in Mage which haven't seen any love. Like Light Show, which I thought they could have maybe buffed instead. But who knows, maybe a 4 mana Lash Siren is going to enable some of these new cards to be good, because the pure mana cheating aspect of this is going to be good for things like Light Show, because you can just spam a lot of them on the same turn. Next we got Infinitize the Maxitude getting changed. This is like a pretty good discover spell to get. I mean, like, you discover it from something and then suddenly you've got a lot of value, but it's not really a card I've seen many people put actually into their decks. This is getting a buff. Most obvious one, this going to 1 mana. Discover a spell, return this to your hand at the end of the turn. I don't know if they're going to do that. If it's like kind of so easy to discover a spell every turn. If this is 1 mana, even as early as turn 1, obviously. Yeah, but I mean, other buffs for this card, I'm not really sure. Maybe it just has to be 1 mana. I'm a little bit worried it will be. One thing I heard suggested because, well, actually I thought of, not suggested, was because the Siren's getting changed, and they actually place these next to each other on the thingy. Maybe they're going to remove the return this to your hand at the end of the turn. Maybe they're just going to have it finale, return this to your hand. So when you do your big Siren turn, if you keep finaleing this thing, you can keep discovering spells over and over and over again. And that might be quite fun. It's not really a massive buff to the card in general, of course, but that specific deck is kind of a cool interaction. Next, we're getting Arcane Artificial buffed. Whenever you cast a spell, gain armor equal to its cost, 1/2 elemental. I mean, the only buffs for this really can be attack going up to 2 or health going up to 3. I think the attack going up to 2 is like a better change if you want to buff this card. I'm just not sure why they want to buff it, particularly because it's already a good card. It's already good at doing what it wants to do. Gaining new armor. A lot of times you don't tempo it out, but maybe if they change the stats on it, you suddenly want to tempo out a bit more. Depends on the matchup. I think if you make it 2/2, you're going to retain the synergy it has with Deathborn, which is a bit nice. Like, if you make it a 1/3, suddenly the turn 7 play of Artificer Deathborn, which is really quite good right now, is not as good because you're just not getting another Skelly. And that does matter because a lot of decks are running Kel Facade as their win condition. So, would prefer to see this a 2/2, but could be a 1/3 as well. It's another card I just don't think needed a buff, and would prefer to see a buff elsewhere. Next, we're getting this new mech buffed. This is the last of the mage buffs. Audiosplitter, 3 mana 4/3 mech. Death Rattle, copy the highest cost spell in your hand. 2 options for this really. Changing the stats is not going to happen because it's already kind of premium for 3-drop, for a 3-drop to be a 4/3. It's either going to be changed to a battle cry, which would help it slightly, or it's going to be decreased to 2 mana, 2 mana 3/2 probably. Both would be a bit beneficial, and I think making it 2 mana would be incredibly beneficial. Mage is in a really bad spot, so possibly that's what they're going to want to do. This is like a card you're probably not running in the Naga Mage anyway, so this would be a buff to Light Show Mages, Control Mages, that sort of thing, and even Burn Mages. This would be actually a very, very good card at 2 mana 3/2. Just being able to copy Cold Case would be insane, copying Deathborn insane, Blizzard, these sort of things. And even if you don't have big spells, copying a Frozen Touch would be really good. And right now, Mage doesn't have actually many 2-drops that they love playing, especially not any aggressive ones. They have some 2-drops and they're all like, okay, this is the only one that really sees play out of all of these right now. But if they change this Audiosplitter into a 2 mana 3/2 mech with this Death Rattle, I'm certain it would be a very good card in a variety of mage archetypes, particularly those running Skellies. Next, we're getting life being changed in Hunter. I do not have it crafted. Stranglethorn Heart. This is 10 mana. It's so expensive. I think the Big Beast archetype is overall really way too expensive. So I guess this card is getting a mana decrease. 9 seems like too little, so maybe it's going to 8, but I could see it going to 9 as well. Nice thing about going to 8 is you can weave the hero power in as well as playing it. But I mean, this is a card that you kind of want to get lots of beasts dead to make it go. And that's kind of hard. You can get like one beast dead with Faithful Companion for sure, and then follow up with this if it gets moved down to 8. So maybe that's just strong enough. But I think the deck overall really needed a buff to Big Dreams. This is like the worst win rate card within a big hunter archetype, a dedicated big hunter archetype. We can just have a look on here at Big Dreams. It's so bad. It's kind of crazy how bad it is. Like, this is the highest sample size we have available. If we look at drawn win rate, this is a dedicated big beast hunter deck. The worst drawn win rate card is Big Dreams. And you might say, okay, but it's meant to be a card you play early to cheat out a big thing. You need it on 5 or it's terrible. But if you look even on the win rate on the mulligan, it's the 4th lowest mulligan win rate card. And this is kind of a card you'd expect to want to keep in the mulligan. But no, it's absolutely terrible. One of the worst cards printed in recent memory, actually. It's so bad. And it doesn't need to be this bad. Simply change the dormant for 2 turns to dormant for 1 turn, and I still think it's not going to be crazy good. I think it's just going to be acceptable in a big beast hunter deck, but they're not touching this card, which I think they should have, even in addition to the change to Stranglethorn Heart, because the deck's a long way away from viability, I think. So it really needs just more than this. If this is the only thing that's changing, Big Dreams is not going to happen. You're just only going to get maybe a hybrid version, which is running Faithful Companions and a few big beasts, but not a very dedicated big beast hunter. Just running like the Banjo and the Hydra and the King Crush, that sort of thing. And not things like the Elephant. Okay, moving on. We're getting Hunter Legendary improved as well. Alder Brightwing. Battlecry, give all arcane spells in your deck spell damage +1. I think this is either going to be 2 mana, 2/3, or it's going to also give the ones in your hand spell damage +1 as well to move it in line with this card, which already does that effect. And this one is arguably stronger within that archetype. The archetype's still kind of poo-poo, so I don't know if this is going to really change that much, but it's a step in the right direction. I don't think this is going to be spell damage +2. Probably a bit too strong. I've heard crazy things like make this start of game effect. That's completely ridiculous. It would be very busted if it did that. But yeah, probably just going to be 2 mana or buffing the ones in hand as well. Next Shaman getting some buffs. Jazz Base getting a buff. So the Overload Shaman archetype is really terrible. And part of the reason for that is because it just can't curve out properly. Like, it's got too many 3 mana plays. Overloads screw you over, so you can't even curve out on the turns afterwards. It just takes way too long to get going. So if they really want to make the archetype pop off, they're going to make this 2 mana. 2 mana, 2/2. And that enables a lot. Lightning Storm's getting buff as well. This is most likely going to be Overload 1, so if we consider that too. 2 mana Jazz Base, play it on turn 2. You can follow up turn 3 with a Lightning Storm and start getting the buff chain going. Also can follow up with Feral Spirits as well. As another turn 3, so it just makes the curve a lot smoother. And what's more is that sometimes you want to be playing Prescience in these decks to tutor your Inza. So if you have the weapon on 2, you can swing twice and then play Prescience on 3. And again, that's a really good curve. So right now, with the Jazz Base costing 3 mana, you can't do any of this. If you're going first, you're sat there on turn 3 with Feral Spirits and a Jazz Base in hand, and you're like, I want to play the Jazz Base first, but it's so slow, and then my turn 4 is going to be a 3 mana play, which overloads me, and on turn 5 I want to play an Inza, which I can't because I'm overloaded. And it's all very, very awkward just because the first step of it, the Jazz base, costs 3 mana. So yeah, if they really want to make it work, they need to change this to 2. But they might just change it to 3 attack. Having said all that, they might just change it to 3 attack. It's 3 mana 3/2 is like the standard for the weapons, but because Overload Shaman's so bad, I'm kind of hoping they change the mana instead. We're also getting a change to the Lifesteal spell. Altered Chord. I think the most likely thing for this is going to get the Torrent treatment. Torrent used to be a card which had a similar effect without the Lifesteal, and it was deal 8, and that initially was costing 2 in its discounted form, and it wasn't very good. But when they made it cost 1, it suddenly became kind of a decent card. So I imagine it's going to be a similar one for this. They're either going to change this to 4 mana with the same effect, or cost 4 less. 4 mana is probably obviously a bit better of a buff because you can just play this without the condition for 4, and it's kind of fine. So I could see them doing that. I don't think there's really much else that they're going to change for this card, other than to try and make it 1 mana. And then it's suddenly kind of looking pretty good. Lightning Storm getting changed. This is definitely getting changed to 1 mana, as previously mentioned, to be more in line with some of the other AoEs in the game. This is just like a bit of a relic of a card right now with Overload 2. This is way too limiting. Being able to go Storm into Feral Spirits, for instance, as a 3 and a 4 will be quite nice. We're also getting Flowrider changed. Now this one's an interesting one because it's not really clear what the buff's going to be for this, because there's so many you can choose from. Right now this is awkward to play because I've mentioned like the curve for Overload Shaman is just so whack. Like everything just not being played on curve. You can't really overload on 1 and play this because you're overloaded. You can't ever really play this on 2 unless you're playing Zap, and Zap's kind of terrible. So really it's kind of a mid-game play, but even in the mid-game you're going to be floating mana a lot of the time if you're playing Flowrider. But maybe if this is getting buffed to 1, suddenly things start looking a little bit easier. And it's a bit more beneficial to like overload into Flowrider plus a 1 mana spell. But I've heard some suggestions, if you're overloaded, discover a copy of a spell from your deck. That seems pretty reasonable, but I think the stat line and the mana is still a little bit limiting for this card. But that is certainly a reasonable buff to it. Make it a little bit stronger so you can actually draw other copies of your overload cards later on in the game. I've heard this being 1 mana 1/2 for the card also, or a 2/1. Completely reasonable too, makes it a lot more easy to play on turns. And I've also heard people say they're just going to get rid of the condition and to say Battle Cry, discover a spell from your deck, instead of if you're overloaded. And that last change will be very, very strong. It'd make it a really, really good 2-drop. So depends how much they want to buff Overload Shaman. Now, looking at all of this, because there's so many buffs, and I just mentioned like Jazz Base going to 2 would enable so much, it kind of makes me think that Jazz Base is not going to 2, because that would probably be almost enough on its own. But we're getting 1, 2, 3 extra buffs, so I'm thinking they're not going to change the Jazz Base to 2, sadly. But maybe if they get rid of the condition on this card, then suddenly you've got a deck that's really good, and of course getting the other 2 buffs as well will help out also. Getting some Warlock changes. Getting Crescendo changed. This has to be going down to 2 mana. I don't think there's much else to talk about there. There's nothing else you can really change on this card. Yeah. Unless they randomly attach, like, draw a card to it or something like that. Most likely just going to go down to 2 mana, and that will suddenly make it quite good. Much easier to squeeze into some of your turns. You could do things like coin Baritone Imp into Crescendo on turn 2. And it's like kind of a good 1-2 punch. Enable a lot of things in the deck. Also getting a change to this card as well. This is getting a buff in some form. I've heard give it taunt. Also could change the stats on it, maybe make it a 4-6 or a 5-5. They've done it in Warrior in the past, where they've bumped a health up on this card. Could see a similar minor change to this one as well, because I feel like with the 2-mana Crescendo, you don't need to make this one much better for the archetype to really take off. But the most impactful change will be making it 4 mana, and obviously decreasing the stats in some form a little bit. And that would bring it a bit more in line with Mischievous Imp. Between Mischievous Imp and this card as powerful turn 4 plays, and you've got those powerful turn 2 plays, maybe this deck actually would take off quite a bit. But I think it's a little scary, actually, if you double buff this package, so by mana at least. So maybe they're going to be a bit safer on it and just buff the stats or give this taunt or something. Next we have Siphon Soul getting buffed. Really, I think this card needs 2 changes to it. It needs to be 4 mana at least. If you make it 3 mana, it might be a bit ridiculously strong, because it's like a removal with an upside. So that's probably not going to be happening. It's going to be 4 mana. But I think Restore 3 is a bit too weak. If you compare it to Cannibalize, which restores usually a lot more than 3 and heals up your board as well, it's really a lot worse. Now, Warlock wants healing a lot more than Priest does, so you're allowed to make the Warlock healing worse, which I think they will do, but I think 3 is still a little bit too little. So I would like to see 4 mana and Restore 4. I'm not sure even then it would see that much play, because current Warlock decks are like really trying to play like this on turn 4, and then beyond turn 4 you don't really have the mana to spend on 4 mana plays, because you're playing Slime, you're playing like Symphony of Sins and stuff like that. So you don't really have mana to fit in 4 with like a 2 mana play. It just doesn't really exist. But I think most likely the change to this would be like 4 mana, Restore 4. We're getting Record Scratcher changed. Now this one I think definitely going to +1 attack on this. I don't think this is going to 2 mana. I think that's a bit ridiculous for Rogue. I think it's just going to enable too much, and probably in other archetypes that they didn't want it to be a card for, like Miracle Rogue. So probably going to make this a 3-2. And that kind of leans me more towards thinking the Shaman one's a 3-2 as well. But yeah, I think the archetype needs a bit more probably than just that change to make it good. I don't think this is really what's been holding it back, but maybe if the attack on this is enough, you can start considering running like a weapon package with Dread Corsairs and things like that, and have that not be too bad. They're also changing McBlingtron, 5 mana, 3-4 right now. This is probably just going to go down to 4 mana, I imagine. Yeah. I think at 4 mana is kind of a reasonable play, especially if this is a weapon-heavy meta, because it's kind of like an anti-weapon tech. I think it's reasonable. And I think they're probably going to try and keep the stat line as a 3-4, just for the flavor, because the original Blingtron was also a 3-4. Then we have Holy Nova getting changed. I think this one, I mean, it's got 2 routes for Holy Nova, really. One is to make it deal 3, heal 3. Maybe don't do the face damage as well anymore. And that brings it in line with like Hellfire and stuff. Or the other change is to make it 3 mana, and that is just going to be very similar to, you know, Lightning Storm. In Shaman, we got Hellfire. In Warlock, and we got Consecration empowered, and they're all 3 mana, so that one can happen too. I think Priest players would probably prefer, I know Tic Tac does, this to be deal 3 and restore 3 rather than the mana discount. I think that's a bit more important to them. But we'll see how it goes for that one. And then we've got 2 Druid buffs. Kiri, Chosen of Elune. Add a Solar Eclipse and Lunar Eclipse to your hand. This is going to definitely decrease in mana, I think. And maybe also get a stat increase. Maybe make it a 3-2 or a 2-3. I think it's kind of reasonable. Don't absolutely have to, but if you want it to see some play, I think you want to boost the stats as well. Because like, if you compare it to Chill Fallen Baron, which has Undead synergy, and it has Corpse synergy, and has a better effect in drawing a card, it really falls short. So I don't think just a simple mana change is good enough. It probably needs like 1 stat bump. Making it a 3-3 is probably a bit too ridiculous. But either attack or the health, I think, as well. And then finally we got the Wampa, also getting buffed. Now this card and this archetype for this card really didn't take off for one big reason. It didn't have Taunt. So I think most likely they're going to give it Taunt. And it'd probably be kind of decent. It'd be really good. Maybe take off the attack of it if it's got Taunt. I'm not sure. But with Taunt, suddenly you get the value out of the Death Rattle every time. It's kind of scary good if it's got Taunt. For like big Death Rattles, you've got Celessi and you've got 10-drop Stoneborn General. Kind of nutty card if it's got Taunt, actually. I mean, other option really is like to decrease the mana. But I think the Taunt one would be a better change and make a new archetype maybe spring up from doing so. So kind of excited to see that in progress. And that's all the changes, guys. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know what you think things are going to be if I was wrong on some of them. Let me know that too. Yeah, the patch is going to be dropping tomorrow. We'll see if we're right then. Thanks for watching, everyone, and see you in the next one.